Good morning. I have 9 o'clock, time to begin. Need to keep all those folks in our thoughts and prayers that have on the sick list, those that are recovering from various illnesses. Always keep Brother Terry in your prayers. Also those that have lost family members, keep those in your prayers. I'm sure Brother Jeremy Day will want to mention it later, but thank everybody that showed up yesterday and helped at the booth at the Mardi Gras. I think we had some good responses. Had several people sign up to win a Bible. Had a few sign up for Bible study. That's the word I'm looking for. Bible study. 36 slips were filled out, so if we just had one good contact out of that'd been well worth it. Told everybody we'd give away hot chocolate next year, but next year it might be 80 degrees. But yesterday it was a little on the brisk side. So, anything else before we begin? Brother Kirk, would you lead us in a prayer, please? I want to go back a couple of weeks and cover one item that I mentioned because we're going to get a little bit more into it in a peripheral way today. But I had mentioned one thing about young folks today. They don't mature as fast as young folks did years ago, my age and all. And after class, Brother Jeremy Day talked to me and he said, I think those numbers might be skewed because of how many people are not Christians and how many people in the world. And I agree with that. In one way, that is an absolute accuracy because if you just take by volume and put the average, it could be 25. But then if you look at the mean, which is the middle, not an average, but the middle, the age could drop down to a little bit lower. For instance, here just this past week, an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old was playing with a handgun. They were, don't know if it was cowboy Indian or cop robber or whatever, but they was playing with a pistol, a handgun. Well, it wound up killing the 15-year-old. Had no intent. Well, that tells me that those two had not known any consequences for their actions, didn't have a clue how to be around it. But yet, my son, when he was 13, if I wanted my handgun, I would send him to get it because I knew I had taught him how to handle it. He had respect for it. He knew the consequences. And I think in Christian homes that applies today also, that with them being brought up in the proper way, they mature and learn consequences a little bit faster than those outside the church. And that's one of the areas that we're going to get into today as we go through here. And let me give you another for instance. The young folks, the people they hang around with, it is great. Yesterday at the Mardi Gras parade, Sister Moody and her and Emma and that group and some of the days, they were out dressed in their uniforms and putting on a karate exhibition. when young folks are introduced to an organization like that and learn how to do things in the proper way, they mature faster than other groups. So one of the questions, I love the headlines on this. It says, building your child's character from the inside out. Who has all the answers? I want to read this way to give us a launching point on today's lesson. It says, often young couples without children will observe other couples who have children and see both things they like and especially dislike. Number two, when the children become teenagers or older, the once arrogant parents confess that at one time they thought they had all the answers, but now they feel as though they may not know what any of the answers are. Now, I said at the very outset of this class when it started out with marriage that I was no expert. Andrew and I will celebrate 50 years of marriage in June. Jim and Diane just celebrated 60 years of marriage.
We're still not experts.
And you're still, and that was going to be my point. Now, I'm glad you said it instead of me, but we're still not experts in that area. And when it comes to raising kids, if I ask, we've got parents in here of all ages, from our age on down to the younger set. Before you had kids, how many of you knew that you had all the answers on how to raise a kid properly?
Yes, I did.
Yes, you did. Most of us think we've got a pretty good grasp on it.
My kids will never be like that.
I wouldn't let my kid. I wouldn't let my kid do it. How many words have we eaten over the years? No kid of mine would do that.
The old saying is, my child won't do that, but you better go look, 'cause he did.
There's a joke that goes along with that I heard many years ago. It said, when a couple has their first child, they're real protective. They get their hand in dirt. They wipe the dirt off and everything. And said by the third child, somebody can come in and say, hey, your child's out there eating gravel. They say, oh, that's all right, just a little extra roughage. So you grow along I see some smiles back there. Was that an agreement? But when it comes to who has all the answers, I know everything is going to lead back to the Bible. But let's talk in reality for just a moment. Yes, sir.
In connection with that, how many of us, though, are better at telling or knowing how somebody else ought to raise their kids?
Right. How many of us are experts at telling the other person? And that's one of the things that's going to, where I'm going with this. Because the deeper I get into this lesson and the more I look at it, I know all the answers, that the Bible is the answer. But then I sit back and say, let's look at reality. I'm an only child. I had cousins that were close enough that I wasn't exactly raised as an only child, even though I'm an only child. And I start looking at my cousins, and when I get to one group, one aunt and uncle, they were very religious. They did everything right to raise their kids. They did everything right to raise their kids right that they could. Number one turned out good. Number two, number three, devil in disguise. Number four was good. Number five went along with 2 and 3 and even committed murder in his later years. Number 6 turned out homosexual. What did they do different with those 6 kids? If they nurtured all of them the same, and I've read books on birth order and all this and read some books on supposedly the genius way of raising kids. But I look back and what did birth order have to do with that jumble? How come some turned out good and some turned out bad, even though there was the mix? They lived in the same home. They had the same nurture. They were all taken to church on a regular basis until they got big enough to be on their own and rebel. Did the parents do something wrong? What happened?
Freedom of choice.
Freedom of choice. Then I start looking back and say, well, what does the Bible say? What about Abraham? Abraham had one that turned out pretty good and had one that turned out not so good. So when it looks at who has all the answers, and Brother Clonch hit it right on the head, we are real good at jumping to conclusions and telling other people how they should raise their kids. But when it comes to us raising our own, do we always do it right? We want to think we do. But if we really look at ourselves, is there room for improvement? Now, I'm not going through this. I don't want us older parents to beat ourselves up because something didn't go right with our kids. And at the same time, I don't want to look at the young folks and say, there's a perfect way to do it, and if you don't do it, you're doing it wrong, because we all have to make adjustments on a daily basis and go through things. But questions, comments so far?
It's a learning process day to day.
It's a learning process day to day. Now, if we go to the Bible for our answers, the Bible absolutely has all the answers that are perfect. The scripture quoted is 2 Timothy 3:16, which we all know very well. 2 Timothy 3:16, 17. And Paul, when we get to number 2 of that, it says, however, in contrast to the ever-increasing evil, there is a safe haven. If only we can develop the right character within our children that they may desire to remain in what they have been taught. I'm going to tailor this back to what I had said about my one set of relatives with 6 in the family. The parents, some of those desired to stay in the way they were taught, and some chose not to. Where was the flaw? And I use that word intentionally, flaw, instead of mistake. Where was the flaw?
Reception.
Huh?
Reception.
Reception. All 6 of those kids are individual kids. You cannot manage, there's no one size fits all or no one formula for everything. Each one requires something different. But in general, there's some things that we can look at when it gets down to the next part there. It says, our precious gifts from God are attacked by evil through friends. How big an influence is friends over the way your children act versus your children being influenced to their friends? not only how much time they spend with them individually, but if they're with a friend, sometimes they're in that friend's home, and there's other influences coming in with that. And it says at school, at all levels, intensely in high school and college. I've mentioned this before, and fortunately here in Alabama we're not confronted with a lot of things that the rest of the world right now is confronted with in schools as far as some of the teachings that they want to teach, which is not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but all sorts of other stuff. But school is a big influence on kids. Yes, sir.
Larry, we'd all be rich if we had a nickel for every time our kids ask why about something. They're full of questions. They're going to get answers to those questions from somewhere. Hopefully it's from the parents, and our responsibility, because we ought to be able to provide the best answers for them.
That's correct. Now, yesterday was the parade. Being a proud grandparent, 2 of my kids were in the parade yesterday. But I think more important, it was the organization they were with. And that was the ROTC unit at the high school. Now, I know that in their math, English, and science classes, they're getting taught some things. But at least in ROTC, they're being taught respect for authority, responsibility, and things that other students at school are not being taught unless they're in one of those organizations. And that's why I said I was so glad that the Moody's were there with the karate and all. In karate, they are taught what? Discipline, self-control, manners, everything that they're not being taught someplace else. So, item 3 was television. I know in this congregation there are some that don't have TV sets, which I think's good. Others do. Do you monitor what your kids watch and how much of it they watch? I know when we babysit, when our grandchildren were older, we got the GBN station, and we would let them watch Digger Doug instead of some of the other cartoons and things that were on, because if you look at some of the teachings, I read a headline just yesterday or day before that this woman is accusing, what's his name, SpongeBob SquarePants or something like that, for causing her to kill her child. I didn't even read the story. I don't want to know.
Well, even the commercials are awful now, and they're on just about all the channels. Even the commercials.
Commercials, there used to be one that was pretty good. McKinnon Toyota had the red-headed kid on it. He was a good actor. Good commercials, but I didn't approve of him being in a commercial selling a car. He couldn't drive. Probably didn't know which end of the car was which, but he made a good commercial. And as Brother Crosby says, kids in commercials today, and we've mentioned this before, if you ever look at them in depth, they always portray the kids as smarter than the parent. How's that work?
Or they're rude to the parent.
Or rude?
Rude to the parent in the commercial.
Well, and this happens both ways now. The kids are rude to the parents and lie to the parents, and then there's even those where the parents are shown lying to the kids. Is that the example you want your kids to see? Yes, sir. Right. And I was going to insert that next because it's not so much just the TV anymore, but with the internet, with Twitter and Facebook and all the other methods of what they call social media. What are I am not on any of those, so I don't know. So when I ask this question, I was always taught never ask a question that you don't know the answer to, but this one I'm going to ask and I have no clue the answer. What are our kids being taught or shown on Facebook and Twitter? And I know on the internet they have access to anything and everything. Now also on the computer there's a button or two that you can push for parental control, but our kids are much smarter in that area than I am, and they can get around those things. You try to lock your phone or lock something else, and before you know it, the kid's got the phone and they're already in there.
That's why you teach them why they shouldn't be doing that stuff, not that you have to watch them.
You got to work with them on the why nots, but all sources of media. Music, I mentioned this last week that even some of the people now are coming out saying that some of the music is partly responsible for all the meanness going on today and things.
That's music.
Pardon?
That's music.
I'm not going to get on that subject today. Books. You go to the library at school, what books are on the bookshelves? I mentioned this before years ago when I was in the book business in schools and give away books to the library. One librarian wanted a book that was called What Would Jesus Do, but would not take that, took another book because she didn't want to get in trouble. And I said, as long as you put that in the optional area, there is no problem legally. And she says, I know, I just don't want to take any chances. They have got teachers, librarians, school administrators, and by they, I'm talking about outside organizations like ACLU and others, so intimidated that they are afraid to do anything or else they'll get in trouble. Yes, sir.
It starts with friends. 1 Corinthians 15:33 talks about evil companionship. We normally use that as far as associations, but that evil companionship really goes along with any of these. What are we making our friends, or what are we spending more time with?
That's correct. Magazines falls under the same category as books. Neighbors, we've talked about that a little bit with friends and their family members. Employment, what are people being taught in their employment that rolls over into their house? They're raising their family. And then I've got an arrow by number 9 that says, any other weapon that Satan can find to use without mercy. Satan is a master manipulator. God knows us, each of us knows everything about us. And Satan does too. And all Satan has to do is work on one weak spot, and he's got you. Whereas God has to work on the whole person and try to save everything. I might have 10 weak spots or 20. But all Satan has to do is get the one that's going to worm me away from the good.
We have a lot of military folks. We understand we have to know the enemy we're going Satan's devices. We have to understand how he operates.
We have to understand how he operates. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. What percentage of the world population does Satan focus his energy on? Pardon? The straight and narrow percentage, which if you throwing that into numbers, what would that be? On the grand scheme of things, if you look at the world religions and who belongs to each organization and which ones teach the truth and all, it comes down to about 1% or less of the world population really adheres to the Lord's church. So Satan only has to be concerned about 1% of the population, because 99% are already in his camp. And of that 1%, he doesn't have to go after the whole person. He just has to go after that one weakness. So Satan has got a pretty good advantage, doesn't he? Because what percent of the population is God trying to go to work with? He's trying to work with 100% of it, but if 1% are doing it right, then he's trying to get 99%, whereas Satan's after the 1%. Brother Day.
Yeah, Satan's biggest tool at this point, I think, is time. All these things that we talked about, we are struggling to teach our kids about priorities, because so many of us as adults don't have our priorities straight. You see, I mean, anywhere you go, you can be in Walmart or in the store, and you see kids in a buggy and they're looking at a tablet, a screen. They've got a phone that they're carrying around, they always have in front of their face. And I think technologically, that's the biggest struggle right now, is that a lot of that screen time and social media and things of that nature are very addictive, especially to young minds and young children. But if you look at it as well, I mean, one of the other things is your employment. You know, how many teenagers do we have? Well, I can't be at church because I have to work. Well, they're still living at home. They don't have to work to survive. There are certainly those who have to work on Sundays or Wednesdays to be able to provide for their families. But we're teaching our children at an early age to deprioritize God and to prioritize all of the worldly things. And we've got to be very careful that we don't set that example for them because of our busy lives or because of things that we've allowed to be, I guess, those items that we prioritize.
See, we used to not have that problem. When I was a teenager, there was a thing called the Blue Law. Don't know if any of you are familiar with that or not. Just meant that certain establishments, they wasn't open on Sunday. It had to be down to an emergency. You could go to the drugstore and you could buy shoelaces, but you couldn't buy shoe polish. Laces are kind of important to keep your shoes on, but polish, you should have planned for that. Should have planned for the laces too, but anyway. There was no competition on Sunday. Then they got the bright idea that they needed to compete for business, so we'll have to be open on Sunday. And now, Sunday in the commercial world is just another day of the week. And they require people to, if you're going to work for the company, you either work the shifts I tell you to, or you don't work. Yes, sir.
Isn't that just like anything else though? Because I remember as a young person when stores first opened on Sunday, it was like from 1 to 4. It was like just did the afternoon between church services. And then that grew and it was later and then it was earlier. Now it's 24 hours. You know, nobody was open on Wednesday either. Everybody went home early on Wednesday. Even sports teams didn't practice on Wednesday. Everybody went home. Not now.
My dad was almost a professional baseball player. and they was playing a game one Saturday that went into extra innings. At midnight, they suspended the game and didn't pick it back up until Monday to finish the game because, as you say, nothing happened on Sunday. And today, not today, but in today's age, weather permitting, and the teams are out practicing soccer and baseball and all the other things. You drive by any sports field on Sunday morning on your way to worship service, and what do you see? Young kids out there, and who's got them there? Their parent. So who's responsible, the kid, the parent, or the people that schedule it for that time of day?
The kids have to answer for it. You want your kids answering for that you have control over it.
If enough parents said we are not going to practice that day, then they would have to schedule it a different day. But ultimately, it comes down to the parent.
But it doesn't matter. I know y'all know that too and agree with that. No matter what's changed with the world and what's changed with the moral compass of this country, God's standard is still the same. And we need to teach our children that. You don't have to be like the people around you. You need to be like Christ. And let the people around you see that you're different. I remember when we used to have soccer tournaments, we would do the All-Stars, and we'd go down for the state tournament, I guess in Dothan. And if you played through on Friday and Saturday, whatever days it was, if you won those games, you played on Sunday. And you play Sunday morning, and then the championship game would be Sunday midday. And we would actually change into our soccer gear in the car after worship. On the way to the game, we'd sub in around halftime on that first game. And I don't know that the coach really liked that very much, but that was the standard. And I appreciate my parents for making that the standard.
Yeah, absolutely. But everything, football, basketball, auto racing, everything competes for your time on Sunday. There should be no competition.
Larry,
Christians belong here on Sunday morning.
I go back even farther, when the blue law was in effect, nothing open, nothing, except if you had an emergency, and these pharmacists, you called them to go to whatever medication you got, that was all.
Yeah.
No service station, no nothing was on.
Yeah, you couldn't, they was on call. Well, at that time I worked for a funeral home, so I know that we were on call. We had to do certain things. Certain things you can't put off, and that's exceptions. But in general, the pharmacy didn't, the hospital pharmacy stayed open because that's the hospital, they gotta be there. But the pharmacies around the hospital and all, they were generally on call, that you could go get an emergency done and that be it. My grandfather passed away during that time, and Grandma wanted him buried in a new suit, and we knew the owner of the store, and we called, and he met us there so they could buy a new suit for him to be buried in, but and didn't do a money transaction until Monday. So that goes back a ways and shows you trust and what went on. But
And we're talking all about Sunday, or particularly about Sunday. But if we don't prioritize God the rest of the week, then Sunday's not going to really matter.
that's quite true. And that gets into Wednesday, even into the Wednesday night, because how many things take place on Wednesday night that keeps you away from it. Some people have no choice. They have to work on Sunday because they got to put food on the table. But if they have a choice and can choose to work any day other than Sunday or Wednesday night, they should put God first. When I owned a bait and tackle shop, I was destined for failure from the outset. I was too dumb to know it at the time. but I would not sell alcohol. I would not sell tobacco products. I would not open on Sunday, and I closed at 5 o'clock on Wednesday.
Not a good business plan for your particular endeavor.
I was looking at Brother Crosby, and I was going to get him to answer me on that. Was I doomed for failure from the outset? Not a good business plan if you want to be where you're supposed to be on Sundays and Wednesdays and not sell certain products. So, anything else along those lines?
Well, one thing I thought of, because I think many of us have family members who aren't members of the church. So sometimes family can be influential to the negative if we're not careful.
Absolutely. Brother Clark?
Part of it's the way that we look at things, even in the discussion just then, we talk about you're doomed for failure. But in reality, you're not. From the spiritual side of it, there's the positive to it. You're not failing because you're continuing to stand for your values and what the scriptures say. I think it's some of it, we look at the negative a lot of times, we get consumed by it, even with all of these bad things that are going to be influences upon our kids. There's a positive side to it as well that we can reinforce. How many kids were at the outreach that we had yesterday? They're there because of the influence of their parents for good.
Yes, sir. Several of them. Brother Crosby?
I was gonna add though that, talking about fishing and all of that, how you talk about not selling alcohol, a lot of that is not as bad as it used to be. Cause it used to be a lot of people that went out fishing and all that, they drank and they smoked and everything like that. It's not quite as bad as that nowadays, to me, doesn't seem like, because a lot of people that are fishing now, if you're like a serious bass fisherman and all that, you're not doing that kind of stuff. You're not going out to drink. That's not what it's about. I got friends of mine that I fish with, like I used to work with, and I talked about going on a fishing trip. And then when there was a girl that I worked with that said, "Yeah, I know y'all go out and get drunk and have a good time." We didn't do that. We didn't drink. None of them smoked or anything like that. We went on fishing trips, and we were so serious about what we were doing, we didn't concentrate on doing that other stuff. And I think a lot of people with these bass fishing tournaments and everything, trying to get people encouraged, it's not as bad as it was years ago, where you're talking about like, well, everybody goes out, don't give the impression that everybody that fishing is drinks, smokes, and does all that, because it's not that way.
I should have clarified and said this was 30 years ago. Because I know you and I have gone out and fished together. No, but I distinctly recall one tournament that I fished. It was a draw partner tournament, and you paired up the boaters and the non-boaters. And the guy that drew my boat, I knew his habits, and I told him the day before we went to fish, I told him, I said, don't bring your alcohol. I said, you're not going to drink in my boat. And he said, I'm not going to be driving the boat. Why not? And I said, because if I fall overboard, I want you sober enough to be able to take care of me. So, but you are right, Brother Crosby, that it doesn't happen near about as much now as it used to. So, but yes, sir.
Isn't it great that we're able to go out and enjoy nature and to fish, and that God's given us that ability to harvest animals or to play, competitive sports, and to be able to improve our physiques and our discipline through taekwondo and things like that. But it would be so great if we would put as much effort, as much commitment, as much of a interest and a stake into what God's will is, and serving Him. There's so much investment that's put into all of these other things, and they're great in and of themselves. But it would just be a wonderful thing if people would be that interested and invested in God.
We're talking about these things influencing our kids, but we also let them influence it's what the kids see us doing, when we gotta have that 7 a.m. tea time on Sunday, because that's the best time. Or we want, family comes to visit, we don't go to church, because, well, family's in town, we can't leave them and go, yeah, you can. Leave them
Bring-
at the house, go to church. Don't-
Bring them with you or leave them at the house, right?
Or I gotta have those extra hours on Sunday, because we're trying to pay for that vacation home or new boat, they see you doing that.
And Brother Crawford's gonna have to straighten me out on this next one too, because it's been so long since I've done it, I don't know if it's still true or not. Might be so many houses around the lake now that it's too well lit to see, but used to, 30 years ago, if you didn't believe there was a God that created everything, you just go out in the middle of the night and lay back in your boat and look up at the stars and see.
It's interesting, Larry, you started with 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17 as far as having the answers. But as we studied the lesson that deals with children, the verse just previous to that, verse 15, speaks about Timothy's faith. It says, from a child, you've known the Holy Scriptures. So, the profitability of what the Scriptures say, he says they started when he was youth, and that's because of his mother and grandmother.
Yeah, it's 2 Timothy 1:5, is it? Also, yeah, I got it down. We're going to close with the reading of 2 Timothy 4:1 through 4. 2 Timothy 4:1 through 4.
While you're getting there, I'd like to make 2 comments.
Okay?
On Sunday morning, on Channel 8 and on Channel 12, there are 2 segments sponsored by the Church of Christ. There used to be only one from Edmond, Oklahoma, and now there's one from South Alabama. Those are really good programs. I try not to miss them. Anyway, another thing too, if you look at the football stadiums or NASCAR today, wouldn't it be wonderful if those people were in service? But they're not.
Well, I got to put a little. The NASCAR, they have a generic worship service on Sunday morning for the drivers and the teams before the race. Notice I said generic service, but for all those spectators, they're on their own.
And some of them are there for 5 days before.
And some of them are there the whole week before. 2 Timothy 4, verses 1 through 4. Paul is talking to Timothy. I charge thee therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick and the dead at his appearing in his kingdom. Preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all longsuffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. And I think that's what everybody in here has been saying, that even though outside these walls the world is doing certain things, that God expects us to stay true, to stay correct, both in doctrine and patience or long suffering. Anything on that?
When you read it, I think seriously said in his verse 1, when he said there's going to be a judgment. We're all going to face the consequences for the things that we've done. And therefore do the other thing in life.
Brother Clance just made a very good comment about verse 1 as being the important one, that we're all going to be judged and everything. But I want to go back to the first word in there, the second word. I charge. What does charge mean?
Challenge you, command you.
Command? Any word you can think of stronger? Or a phrase that might be stronger? when you are charged with a responsibility, you are responsible. Huh? You own it. When you are charged, that means that without failure, you are to do this. And that's what Paul is telling Timothy in here, that you must stay true. You must be instant. Whether people are for it or against it, you have to be there. You have to reprove, rebuke, exhort.
In the military, that's a command.
It's a command, but commands carry responsibility. That's where I was going. It's not so simple as saying, I command you to do this, but it's a weighty proposition. That's what I'm trying to get to. Anything else? Well, according to my watch, the bell should be ringing just about any time. So we're going to close. Next week, I won't be here. Brother Clonch is going to, I think, Brother Clonch, he's not. Brother Clonch will. Andrew and I are going to Arkansas. One of her old-time friends, they're celebrating their 50th anniversary. They used to be roommates together before, while they were both single and trying to work and make a living. So.
Just to help you out a little bit here, I'm going to teach you something here. You didn't have to put old time in there when you said Andrea, so you could have just said friends.
A little redundant in speech. Okay. Got
Gotta understand some of us are still middle-aged.
Or young.
Thank y'all.